They arrived on a calm, clear day. The sun was shining over Earth as usual, the blue sky stretching endlessly above the city of Seoul, where most of the world's leaders were gathered for an international summit. No one had expected the unexpected. The announcement came first through a simple broadcast that echoed through every television and radio around the world. A soft voice, robotic yet smooth, declared, "Visitors from beyond your world have arrived. They come with gifts." It was the first message from them. The world froze. There was no panic, no rush, just an overwhelming sense of curiosity. It didn't matter that humanity had always dreamed of extraterrestrial life. This was real. This was happening. Jae-sung, the lead scientist at the United Nations Space Division, was in his office when he first heard the announcement. He had been working for years to develop technologies that could one day allow humanity to contact extraterrestrial beings. He hadn't expected it to happen like this, so suddenly, so casually. A part of him felt a little dizzy. He was prepared for the discovery, but not like this. Across the globe, similar reactions occurred. Cities paused their daily routines. News outlets switched to live coverage. Experts from every field were summoned, ready to answer questions and give their opinions. Some wondered if this was a hoax. Others feared the worst on invasion, perhaps. But Jae-sung knew that it couldn't be an attack. No weapons had been shown. There was nothing aggressive about the message. Within hours, the first alien ships were visible across the sky. They were massive, but not menacing. They hovered high above cities, gleaming silver under the sun. The shape was strange long, like a giant leaf or a smooth curved shell. They didn't make any loud noise, and their movements were slow and deliberate. Min-G, a young diplomat and linguist, was at the summit when the ships appeared. She had been assigned to this special assignment, although she had no idea what exactly it entailed. Her job was to help manage the Earth's response to this new presence, to bridge the communication gap between these visitors and humanity. But now, standing in front of the world's leaders, Min-G was more uncertain than ever before. The room buzzed with excited murmurs. Someone cleared their throat and addressed the summit. "We need to prepare," one of the representatives said. "What do we know about them? Are they hostile?" Min-G felt a wave of anxiety. She wasn't prepared for this. None of them were. She tried to steady her breathing, thinking about the responsibilities ahead of her. She had spent years learning different languages, studying how humans could communicate with others, whether through spoken words or other means. But this was different. This was far beyond anything she had imagined. These were not just aliens. They were offering gifts. As the hours passed, there was no more confusion, no more panic. The alien ships began to lower slowly toward the Earth, and officials everywhere scrambled to organize first contact. People began to gather in parks and fields. They were curious, unsure, but strangely calm. The ships weren't hostile. At least, they didn't appear to be. Jae-sung was among the first group of scientists and experts called to a meeting. The alien ships had landed in several key locations across the planet: New York, Paris, Tokyo, and here in Seoul. The first contact was to be made soon. Jae-sung was not the type to get nervous. His life's work had prepared him for moments like this. But even he couldn't help but feel a small sense of fear and wonder. The aliens had not communicated much, only the message about the gifts. It was strange to say the least. What could they mean by gifts? At the same time, Jae-sung couldn't ignore the incredible potential of what was happening. This could change everything. Earth had only begun to scratch the surface of intergalactic exploration. To think that an alien species had chosen to contact Earth at this point in human history, that in itself was an incredible gift. Min-G stood next to the leaders, watching the alien ships from the large windows of the summit building. A huge crowd had gathered outside, watching silently. The only sound was the occasional hum of the ships, which somehow sounded more like a calm breeze than anything threatening. "Do we know anything about their technology?" someone asked. Jae-sung nodded. "We've detected advanced energy signatures. The ships are powered by something beyond our current understanding. But so far, there's nothing that suggests hostility. It's still unclear what they want." Just then, the message from the aliens came again. This time, it was clearer, sharper. "We bring you gifts," the voice said. "Gifts that will improve your world." And then the transmission ended. There was a long silence. Minji and Jae-sung exchanged looks. They couldn't be sure, but it felt like they were only getting part of the story. The next few hours were a blur. Jae-sung was whisked away to a secure lab where he and a team of scientists began examining the first samples from the alien ships. It was clear now that these gifts weren't just symbolic, they were physical objects. It's advanced technologies that humans had never seen before. There were devices, materials, and artifacts, each more puzzling than the last. Min-G, meanwhile, was tasked with meeting the alien representatives. She wasn't sure what to expect. She'd studied countless languages, but this was beyond anything in her textbooks. A small group of Paxian ambassadors. What the humans had come to call the aliens stood, waiting in a bright, sterile room. They were humanoid in shape, but their skin was unlike anything seen on Earth. It was translucent, glowing faintly with a soft blue hue. Their eyes were large, dark, and unblinking. They didn't speak immediately, but when they did, their voices were calm, smooth, and strange. "We are Pexians," one said. "We have traveled across the stars to offer you gifts. You are not alone in the universe." Minji felt a chill run down her spine. "Why have you come?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "To help," the Paxian replied simply. "Your world has potential, but you are not yet ready. We offer you what you need to grow." It was hard for Minji to understand their meaning. Their words were simple, but their tone was direct and matter-of-fact. They were not here to teach humanity. Not really. They were here to show humanity a better way, a faster way. Jae-sung's mind was already racing. Gifts from beings like this? He could hardly contain his curiosity. If the Paxians were truly offering the advancements they claimed, this could change everything. As night fell over the world, the first signs of humanity's response began to emerge. People weren't afraid. They were fascinated. The first few gifts had already been displayed on global news channels. They were unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Machines that could purify water in seconds. A device that could heal injuries with a single touch. Technologies that humans had only dreamed of. But as the Paxians made their presence known, there were whispers too. Could these gifts be too good to be true? Was there something more to their intentions? The days that followed the Paxians' arrival were a whirlwind of activity. The whole world was consumed by the events, and the news was filled with updates, interviews, and questions. The governments, scientists, and leaders from every corner of the Earth scrambled to understand what had happened and what was yet to come. The Paxians' gifts were the talk of every home, every office. In every street, Jae-sung couldn't stop thinking about the alien technology. His mind raced with the possibilities. It had been only days since they'd received the first samples of the Paxians' gifts, but already they had begun to test some of the devices. The results were beyond anything humanity had ever seen. The energy device, a small metallic object the size of a baseball, had been able to generate power far beyond what any human-made power plant could. With just a touch, it could provide enough energy to power an entire city block for a week. The healing device, shaped like a small tube, could treat injuries and sickness in an instant. It was nothing like the medical technologies humans had developed. It was faster, more efficient, and seemed to have no side effects. Jae-sung's team was working tirelessly to understand how the Paxians' technology worked. But as they dug deeper, they began to encounter strange inconsistencies. The devices were incredibly advanced, but there was something about them that felt wrong. They worked, but they didn't seem to fit into the natural order of human progress. Jae-sung felt a strange unease. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate the gifts. It was just that there was something too easy about them. As if they had been handed to humanity without any effort, Minji was equally concerned, but in a different way. She had spent most of her career in diplomacy, helping countries communicate and resolve conflicts. Now, standing face to face with the Paxians, she had to find a way to speak for all of humanity, and she wasn't sure where to begin. The Paxians, for all their grandeur, were still a mystery. They spoke little about their own history or origins. They explained that they had traveled for centuries, visiting different worlds to offer their gifts. But whenever Minji pressed them for more details, they became vague, almost evasive. It was as though they were hiding something. Minji had learned much about the Paxians, but she still couldn't understand their true motives. Why had they come to Earth? Was it really just to help? Or was there something else at play? As the days went on, more and more gifts were delivered. Medical devices, agricultural tools, machines that could create food from nothing, each one was more incredible than the last. The world watched in awe as these gifts were unveiled. At first, there was excitement and gratitude. Humanity had been given a second chance, an opportunity to fix all the problems that had plagued the Earth for centuries. Climate change, hunger, disease, all of it, seemed to be solvable with the Paxian gifts. But soon, cracks began to appear in the shining surface of the Paxians' generosity. People started to ask questions. Some scientists, including Jae-sung, noticed that the technology the Paxians brought wasn't entirely new. It wasn't even entirely alien. Some of it, especially the medical and agricultural tools, resembled early prototypes of human inventions. Jae-sung couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Paxians had promised gifts, but were they really offering something new? Or were they simply giving humanity a faster version of what humans had already started to develop? The energy device was impressive, yes, but humans had been working on clean energy for years. The healing device was amazing, but it was built on the same principles as human-made medical devices, just far more advanced. Even the food-producing machine was based on ideas that Jae-sung had seen in agricultural research papers. It wasn't just that the technology was familiar, it was that it was too familiar. The Paxians had given humanity the perfect tools, but they hadn't given anything original. It felt like they were showing humanity what could have been, not what humanity needed to achieve. Minji had similar concerns. She had spent days speaking with the Paxians, trying to learn more about their culture, their technology, and their history. They were kind, patient, and polite, but when she asked about their origins, they always skirted the question. The Paxians explained that they had been traveling for hundreds of years, offering their gifts to countless civilizations, helping them to grow. But there was always something elusive about their stories. The more Minji spoke with the Paxians, the more she began to feel like a pawn in their game. They didn't seem to care about humans as individuals. They seemed to see humanity as a project, a race to be molded and shaped according to their standards. And there was something else. Something Minji couldn't quite place. Every time the Paxians spoke of their travels, they seemed to be avoiding the same question. Why? Why did they travel from world to world offering their gifts? What did they gain from it? One afternoon, Minji sat in her office, watching the Paxian ambassadors through the glass windows of her building. They were standing together, speaking in their soft, melodic language. The words were too fast for her to understand, but there was something in their posture that troubled her. They were calm, composed, but they seemed to be waiting for something. The door to her office opened, and Jae-sung stepped in, his face serious. "Minji," he said, "I think we need to talk." "What's going on?" Minji asked, standing up from her desk. "I've been looking into their technology more closely," Jae-sung said, his voice low. "There's something strange about it. The energy devices, the medical machines, they're not entirely new. Some of the basic principles are human-made, just enhanced. And some of the devices, they don't even seem to work the way they should. There's a pattern, but it doesn't make sense." Minji frowned. "Are you saying that the Paxians didn't invent this technology? That they copied it from us?" Jae-sung nodded. "Not exactly. But it's like they found our prototypes, the things we were just starting to develop, and made them work better. They didn't bring us something new. They brought us versions of what we already had. Better versions, yes, but versions nonetheless." Minji felt a cold shiver down her spine. "So, they didn't give us anything original? They're just speeding up our progress?" "That's what it looks like," Jae-sung said, "and it gets worse. I've been reading their messages. They're very careful with their words, but if you read between the lines, It's clear they're not interested in teaching us. They're offering us these gifts to push us forward, to make us evolve faster. Minji's mind raced. This was not what she had expected. She had thought the Paxians were benevolent beings here to help humanity, but now it seemed like they were trying to control the pace of human progress. They were giving humans the tools to become more advanced, but in a way that left no room for human creativity, no room for organic growth. Why? Minji asked. Why are they doing this? That's the question we need to answer, Jae-sung said. They want us to be more advanced, faster. But why? What do they gain from it? Minji thought about the Paxians' calm faces, their gentle smiles. They had never shown any sign of malice, but the more she thought about it, the more it seemed like they were pushing humanity in a certain direction. A direction they had already chosen. Days passed in a blur of activity. The excitement of the Paxian arrival was still fresh, but it was starting to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. The world had been given incredible gifts, technologies that could end hunger, cure diseases, and clean the planet's air and water. But as Jae-sung and Minji dug deeper, they began to see the cracks in the shiny surface of these gifts. Jae-sung spent hours in the laboratory with his team, examining every device the Paxians had given them. It was clear that the technology was far beyond anything humans had ever created. And yet, as he tested the devices, he began to feel a growing sense of frustration. The more he learned, the more he realized that these gifts weren't truly new. They were just better versions of things humans had already started working on. The energy devices were the most obvious example. These small, sleek machines could generate clean energy with almost no waste. A dream for anyone working in the field of renewable energy. But Jae-sung knew that humans were already on the verge of achieving something similar. The Paxians had simply refined the process, perfected it to a level humans had only begun to imagine. The machines didn't teach anything new. They didn't inspire new ideas. They just gave humanity a shortcut. The healing devices were another puzzle. When Jae-sung used one on a small wound, it healed in seconds. It was incredible. But when he compared the technology to human medical research, he saw the same principles at work, just a faster, more effective version. The same basic principles of cell regeneration and tissue repair, only now they worked instantly. The Paxians had handed humanity a tool, but they hadn't taught humanity how to create it. They hadn't shared the knowledge behind it. And then there was the food-producing machine. It could create food from nothing, turning basic minerals into complex meals with the push of a button. It was a breakthrough in agriculture. Jae-sung knew that it was built on the same ideas humans had been developing for years. The Paxians had given them a finished product, but they hadn't shown them how it worked, how to make it themselves. Minji had been grappling with her own concerns. As a diplomat, her job was to represent humanity's interests in the face of the Paxian gifts. But the more she learned, the more questions she had. She had spoken to the Paxian ambassadors numerous times. While they were kind and patient, they remained vague when it came to their motives. They insisted they were there to help, to guide humanity to a better future. But what did that really mean? Why did they care so much about humanity's future? Minji began to feel that the Paxians weren't offering humanity true freedom. They were offering something more like control. They wanted humanity to move faster, to grow at a pace that suited their plans, not humanity's own natural rhythm. And that made her uncomfortable. One evening, Minji sat alone in her office, reviewing the transcripts of her conversations with the Paxians. The words they used were always careful, precise. They never gave direct answers, always returning to the same message: we are here to help. But Minji had begun to wonder if help really meant what she thought it did. She had spent years studying human behavior, learning how to mediate between different cultures and negotiate peace. But the Paxians were different. Their calm, almost detached demeanor made it hard to understand their true intentions. They were kind, yes. But kindness wasn't always a sign of goodwill. Minji couldn't shake the feeling that the Paxians were holding something back. They kept saying that they had traveled the stars to offer their gifts to other civilizations. But why? What did they want from humanity? What did they want from Earth? She glanced up from the papers, lost in thought. The Paxians were not offering humanity a future of true discovery. They were offering humanity the chance to skip ahead, to take the easy way out. And Minji wasn't sure that was a gift at all. The next morning, Jae-sung called Minji into his lab. She had come to trust him over the past few weeks. And when she saw the look on his face, she knew something important had happened. "What is it?" Minji asked, her voice tense. Jae-sung didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured for her to follow him into the testing room. On a table in front of him was one of the Paxian devices. It looked like a small, shiny orb, smooth and metallic, with faint blue lights running along its surface. "I've been analyzing this," Jae-sung said, pointing to the orb. "It's supposed to be some sort of energy converter, but when I ran a diagnostic, I found something strange." Minji stepped closer, examining the device. "Strange? What do you mean?" Jae-sung turned to her, his expression serious. "This device, it doesn't work the way it should. I've been looking at its energy signature, and it's completely different from anything we've seen before. It's built on principles we know, but it doesn't follow the same laws of physics. It's like they've found a way to bend the rules." Minji frowned. "Are you saying this device isn't really working? That it's not following the rules we understand?" Jae-sung nodded. "Exactly. It works, but it shouldn't. It's too efficient. There's something off about it." Minji felt a chill run down her spine. "So it's not just that they've given us a shortcut. They've given us something that doesn't even make sense." Jae-sung looked at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "That's what it seems like. I don't know how they've done it, but we need to understand it. We need to know what they're really offering us." Minji nodded slowly, her thoughts racing. "And what if they're not offering us anything at all? What if they're just showing us a future that's not really ours?" Jae-sung didn't answer right away. He walked to the window and stared out at the Paxian ships, which still hovered peacefully above the earth. The ships were quiet, almost calm in their stillness. It was hard to imagine that something as simple as a shiny device could be the key to understanding the Paxians' true intentions. "I don't know," Jae-sung said, his voice low. "But I think we're starting to realize that the Paxians aren't just giving us gifts. They're showing us a path they want us to follow." Minji's heart sank. A path that isn't our own. The tension in the air was thick. The Paxians had given humanity so many gifts, so many promises. But as the days passed, more and more people began to question what they were really offering. Were these gifts truly meant to help humanity? Or were they a tool to manipulate, to control? Jae-sung spent sleepless nights in the lab, working with his team to understand the true nature of the technology the Paxians had brought. Every new device, every new machine, seemed perfect at first, but the deeper they dug, the more they found that didn't quite fit. One evening, as Jae-sung sat at his desk reviewing the latest findings, Minji knocked on the door. He looked up, his face drawn with exhaustion. "You're still here?" Minji asked, stepping inside. Jae-sung gave a tired smile. "I can't stop. There's something about these devices, something that doesn't add up. I need to understand it." Minji nodded, walking over to the table where several of the Paxian devices were spread out. She picked up one of the energy converters, the smooth, shining orb that had first caught their attention. It felt heavy in her hand, but it was also strangely light, as if it were made of something more than just metal and circuitry. "We've analyzed them over and over," Jae-sung said, rubbing his eyes. "But every time they just don't fit the rules we know. These things are too efficient, too perfect." Minji glanced at the device again. "It's like they're using science we don't understand," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Or maybe they've found a way to break the rules." "That's what I'm afraid of," Jae-sung replied. "They've handed us these tools, but they haven't taught us how to make them. They haven't shown us how they work. We're just using them without understanding. What happens when we need to fix them? What happens when we need to improve them ourselves?" Minji put the orb down gently, a frown crossing her face. "So we're just supposed to rely on them forever?" Jae-sung's expression was grim. "It's starting to look that way. And the more I think about it, the more I wonder if they've been setting us up for something. They're offering us the shortcut, the easy way out. But there's no real progress in that. If we don't learn how to do this ourselves, we'll never truly grow. Minji felt a knot form in her stomach. She'd been feeling the same way, but hearing Jae-zoon put it into words made it all the more real. They had been given the future, but it wasn't their future. It was a path someone else had chosen for them. A path that didn't require them to think for themselves, to struggle, to learn. It was too easy. Too convenient. "We need to talk to them," Minji said, her voice firm. "We need to ask them the right questions." Jae-soon looked at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "You think they'll answer?" Minji nodded. "I don't know, but we have to try. We can't just sit back and accept this. We need to know what they really want from us." The two of them left the lab and headed to the Paxian embassy, a sleek, shining building that had been constructed in the heart of the city. It was nothing like the buildings on Earth, with its smooth, flowing lines and translucent walls. It seemed almost alive, as if it were made of something organic, rather than just metal and glass inside. The Paxians were waiting. Their calm, serene faces greeted Minji and Jae-soon, but there was something in their eyes that made Minji uneasy. They were always watching, always waiting. She couldn't quite place it, but it felt like they were in control. Even when they weren't saying anything, "We have questions," Minji said, her voice steady but firm. "There are things we don't understand about your gifts, about your technology, and about why you've come to Earth." The Paxian who spoke first was taller than the others, with long silvery hair and glowing blue eyes. He had a calm, almost fatherly presence, but his words were carefully measured. "As always, we have come to help," he said simply. "You are a young species, struggling to find your way. We offer you the tools to grow, to reach your potential." Jae-soon stepped forward, his expression serious. "But these tools, they're not ours. We didn't create them. You've given us devices that work, but we don't understand how they work. We don't know how to build them ourselves. And we're worried that without that knowledge, we'll never truly learn. We'll never be able to stand on our own." The Paxian ambassador's face remained unchanged. "That is the nature of gifts," he replied. "We offer you the tools, the means to advance. It is up to you to decide how to use them. We have simply removed the obstacles that slow you down." Minji felt her frustration growing. "But it's not just about speed. It's about independence. We need to understand how these things work, how to improve them. Otherwise, we're just dependent on you. We'll never grow if we can't learn on our own." The Paxian ambassador looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You do not understand. You do not yet see the value in what we offer. We are not here to teach you how to make these things. We are here to give you the opportunity to use them, to evolve faster. You are too slow. We are helping you." Jae-soon shook his head. "That's not helping. That's controlling. You're offering us a future that we didn't choose. A future where we don't have to think, don't have to struggle, don't have to grow. You're giving us a shortcut, but that shortcut might not be the right path." The Paxian ambassador's eyes seemed to glow brighter, but his voice remained calm. "You are ungrateful. We have traveled across the stars to bring you these gifts, and still you question us. Why do you resist? Is it not better to progress quickly than to stumble through the darkness of your own making?" Minji's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her, but she refused to back down. It's not about resisting progress. It's about learning. It's about building our own future, not having it handed to us. The ambassador's gaze softened slightly, though his voice remained firm. "You will learn in time. But you must understand we are offering you a future without pain, without struggle. Why would you reject that?" Jae-sung felt a cold wave of realization wash over him. The Paxians weren't here to help humanity grow. They were here to shape humanity into something that fit their vision, their idea of what humanity should be. The Paxians had come not to teach, but to guide like a parent forcing their child down a path they weren't ready to walk. "We don't want your shortcuts," Jae-sung said, his voice quiet but filled with resolve. "We want to grow on our own terms. We want to learn, to struggle, to build our own future." The Paxian ambassador said nothing for a long moment. Then, with a small, almost sad smile, he spoke. "As you wish," he said softly. "But remember this, you cannot stay in the darkness forever. One day, you will realize that we were offering you the light. And when that day comes, you will wish you had accepted our gifts." Minji and Jae-soon left the embassy feeling no closer to understanding the Paxians' true motives. But one thing was clear: they had made their choice. They would not accept the Paxians' easy path. They would build their future on their own terms, no matter how hard that might be. Days after their confrontation with the Paxians were filled with uncertainty. It was clear that humanity was at a crossroads. The world had been given the tools to become something more, something greater, but at what cost? The Paxians had offered shortcuts, pathways to a future without struggle, without the hard work of discovery and innovation. But humanity, as a whole, begun to realize that these shortcuts might not lead to the kind of future they truly wanted. Jae-soon and Minji continued their work, but the weight of the decision they had made lingered over them. It was a decision that would shape the rest of their lives, and possibly the future of the entire human race. They had rejected the Paxians' gifts, not because the technology wasn't impressive, but because it didn't allow humanity to grow on its own terms. It didn't allow humanity to learn, to struggle, to earn its progress. One evening, as Jae-soon sat in his lab, reviewing the data from the latest tests, Minji came in, her face filled with determination. "We need to act now," she said, her voice urgent. Jae-sung looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" Minji walked over to his desk, her eyes focused. "We've been talking about this for weeks. We've rejected their gifts, but the Paxians aren't going to stop. They're not just going to leave. They want us to accept their path. If we don't do something, they might try to force us down that road." Sung's brow furrowed. "You think they'll try to push us? But they've already told us they're here to help. They said we can accept or reject their gifts." Minji shook her head. "They may have said that, but look at how they've acted. They gave us these amazing gifts, but they didn't teach us how to use them. They didn't show us how to make them ourselves. They want to control the pace of our progress. And I think they'll do whatever it takes to make sure we follow their path." Jae-soon leaned back in his chair, thinking. It wasn't just the technology that bothered him. It was the way the Paxians spoke. The way they seemed to think humanity was too young, too slow to make its own decisions. It was as if they believed they knew better than humanity did. "We can't let them take over," Jae-sung said finally, his voice firm. "We can't let them shape our future for us." Minji nodded. "Exactly. We need to show them that humanity is capable of finding its own way. We can't let them think that we're just some project they can control." The two of them knew that it wasn't going to be easy. The Paxians were powerful, their technology far beyond anything humans had ever seen. But they also knew that humanity had something the Paxians didn't: the ability to learn, to adapt, and to fight for what was right. "We need to take a stand," Minji said. "But we can't do it alone. We need the support of the world." Jae-soon stood up, determination in his eyes. "Then we'll make them understand. We'll show the world that humanity doesn't need shortcuts. We don't need gifts to become great. We'll prove that we can grow on our own." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Minji and Jae-sung reached out to leaders, scientists, and activists from all over the world. They knew that this wasn't just about rejecting the Paxians' gifts. It was about reclaiming humanity's future. The message they wanted to send was clear. Humanity didn't need to rely on alien technology to progress. They could build their future with their own hands, as the world's leaders met to discuss the next steps. Tensions ran high. Some were still in awe of the Paxian technology. They argued that humanity couldn't afford to turn away such an incredible gift. But others, including Jae-sung and Minji, argued that accepting the Paxians' help would mean giving up humanity's right to choose its own destiny. "We've come this far on our own," Jae-sung said at one of the meetings. "We've built the technology we have, and we've made mistakes. But those mistakes are what have made us who we are. We can't let someone else decide our future." Minji stood beside him, speaking passionately. "The Paxians are offering us a future that's been laid out for us. But it's not our future. It's a future they've already chosen. We need to make our own choices, even if that means struggling, even if that means failing. That's how we grow." The room was quiet as the leaders listened. For the first time, they could see the truth in what Minji and Jae-sung were saying. The Paxians weren't offering a future of freedom, they were offering a future of dependence. Humanity would be stuck relying on them forever, unable to create anything on its own. Finally, after hours of debate, the decision was made. The world would reject the Paxians' gifts. They would no longer accept the shortcut to the future. Instead, humanity would continue to build its own path, relying on its own ingenuity and determination. But rejecting the Paxians wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The world now had to face the consequences of its decision. The Paxians wouldn't leave quietly. They would fight to have their way. But humanity was ready. They had made their choice, and they would stand by it. Jae-sung and Minji stood together in front of a crowd of thousands. The decision had been made, and now it was time for the world to see what humanity could do on its own. There was no turning back now. "We've rejected the easy way," Jae-sung said, his voice steady but filled with hope. "Now, we will build our future, our way. We will create a future where humanity is free to grow, to learn, and to make its own mistakes. We will prove that we don't need gifts. We don't need shortcuts. We just need each other." Minji stood beside him, her voice clear and strong. "We may not know what the future holds, but we know one thing. It will be ours to shape. We will take the lessons we've learned, the technology we've developed, and we will move forward together. We will make our own future." The crowd cheered, their voices rising in unity. The decision had been made. The Paxians may have given humanity gifts, but humanity had refused to be controlled by them. Now, the world would face the challenges ahead, but they would do it on their own terms. They would fight for their future, for the future of Earth, and for the right to shape their own destiny. As the world moved forward, the Paxians remained in the background, watching from their ships above. They had offered their gifts, but humanity had chosen a different path. It wasn't the path the Paxians had envisioned, but it was the path that humanity had chosen for itself, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Asterisk.